This is a fully working Remake application. It is a to-do list application. So it allows you to create to-dos, update those to-dos, and delete to-dos. I'm going to show you quickly how this works and how Remake interprets this code. So just from the get-go, this is mostly HTML, right? We have a UL element, we have an LI element, we have a button element. There's really just three elements here. Also, we have these curly brace things. What are those? Those are part of the handlebars templating language. It's one of the most popular front-end and back-end templating languages. Here, we're using it for back-end templating. We're looping through the to-dos that are in the data, and then displaying this list item for each of those. The next thing to understand is that these data attributes here, data O key, data O type, data O type, those are all responsible for exporting the data from the page. So they're telling Remake how this data is going to be bundled up and saved to the database. Also, this data L key. So just so you know, data O stands for data output, the data I stands for data input, and then data L stands for location. This really is part of the data O family because it also exports data, but it looks for the data in a slightly different place. Whereas the data O keys look for the data in the value of the attribute right here, right here, right here. The data L key is a location key, and that looks for the value of this attribute inside of the current element or somewhere else on the page. But it defaults to just looking inside of this list item right here at this to-do text. Now, let's quickly go over how this data is going to be exported on the page, how Remake kind of converts this data into an object. Right here, we can see we have a data O key equal to do's. That tells Remake that this element represents an object, and that object's key should be set to to-dos. And then this the inner object is a list, and that just is converted into an array. So these two attributes combined are going to create an object inside of which is an array that has that's under the key to-dos. So we're going to have the object and then a key of to-dos, and then that points to an array. And that's what these two attributes do automatically for you. Next, we're going to loop through each to-do in this data.todos object. Now, we don't have this data yet, so when we first render the page, we're not actually going to get any to-dos. But let's just go through this anyways. So if we did have a to-do on the page, if this was rendered, this data O type would tell us that the to-do is an object, okay? And it's going to have a key and a value inside of it, at least one. A lot of objects have multiple keys and multiple values. The way we're going to set the key is usually with a data O key, and then we're going to set that equal to some value. That's going to be some text value. But in this case, we have a data L key. And so like we said, the value of that key is going to be inside of the current element by default. It's just going to point to the inner text of this element. Now, what's the key name of this? Well, we just look after the key part of this. So we do data L key, so that's saying it's a location key, and then this is the key part of the object, so text. So inside the object, we're going to have a key of text and a value of todo.text. So whatever the text property already is inside of one of these to-dos. Okay, then we're going to end our for loop. And like I said, we're not actually going to loop over anything in the first version of this app. We actually need to be able to add new to-dos. That's where this comes in. So this very simple attribute, data I new equals to do, whenever you click on a button or an element that has this data I new attribute on it, it's going to look for a template called to do, and it's going to render that template, and then it's going to attach it to the page. Now, all of these attributes that I've already mentioned, some of them have alternate syntax and more powerful syntax. This is one of those. So you can actually control where on the page you're going to attach the new to-do, if it's going to go at the beginning or if it's going to go at the end of a list. But by default, it's going to look for the closest list in which to insert this to-do. Now, how do we know where the closest list is? Well, we defined it right up here, data O type list. So that's all it's going to look for. And that's because by default, when you're adding a new item to the page, most likely it's inside of a list. And most likely you want that list to be exported with Remake as part of the data. So we're just going to look for the closest list that Remake knows how to export and add the to-do to the bottom of that. Now, normally this to-do item refers to a template. But in this case, we've actually defined the template inline on the page using this for loop. So all this is going to look for is an item that matches an item in the for loop. And we have this name to do matches this name to do right here. So by having this name to do right here, we're actually defining this template, this inner template here. And so when you click on button, it's going to automatically grab this template in here because it's going to match the to-do to the to-do, and it's going to render this list item with all of its attributes and with the to-do.text. Now, this to-do.text is the only thing that's not included in the current code. That is something you have to define in your data folder. It's very simple to do. All you need to do is make a todo.json file, and in that JSON file have a property called text, and now it's going to know how to render these new to-do items. By default, we have a JSON file that has the text equal to new to-do item. So we're going to see when we look at this example application that when you click on the Add button, it's going to render this new list item with the inner text set to new to-do item. Now the last thing to look at is this data I editable key. This data I editable key, I stands for input, just like it stands for input here. So this is input going into the page. This data I editable will automatically default to editing any keys on the current element. Now, this is another one of those super flexible attributes. You can use it for a lot of different things. You can use it to edit other data somewhere else on the page, but by default, it's going to just look at the current element, so the current list item, and it's going to look on that list item for any keys. And it finds one right here, this data location key, and it's going to edit that using a single line text input. So that's again the default. There's a lot of other options there. You can pass into data I editable, and it's going to be able to handle images and files and multi-line input. But by default, it's just going to open up an input area where you can put in a single line of text, which will be editing this key. Now, if you have multiple keys on here, it's going to pop up multiple input areas. And it's just smart like that. But again, you can pass in some option here, very simple option, to just tell it to edit one key if that's what you want. So by default, when you click on this list item, it's going to trigger this editable attribute, and it's going to edit the data on this element. And right now, all it has is one key value pair, so it's going to default to editing this key of text. Now let's look at how this looks in practice. So I didn't style this application at all. You can see I have this very small Add To Do button in the corner. This is completely unstyled. All I'm using, again, is just this HTML for this entire application. So let's look what happens when we click Add To Do. It's going to render new to-do item. Now, like I said before, this new to-do item text is coming from a simple JSON file in your data folder where you can control what new templates render when they're rendered. But the actual template of the list item is coming from right here inside of this for loop, and it's rendering it with all of these data attributes, so it's going to know how to export its data, right? So now if we were to look at the actual data exported by this application, it would be an object with a key of to-dos, and that would point to an array, and inside that array would be an object, and that object would have a key of text, and it would have a value of the inner text of this list item element, which is new to-do item. So that's what our data looks like on the back end right now. We can add a few more to-dos, and now we have multiple items inside of there. If we click on one of them, we can say do yoga and click save, and boom, we got it. Now if you're wondering where the heck did this inline edit area come from, this comes by default with Remake, and it relies on the data editable attribute to know when to trigger itself. So if you have this data editable attribute defined on an element, it's going to know to trigger this inline edit area with a remove button, with a cancel button, with a save button. And you can remove this remove button if you don't want the item to be removed from the page, and that's just an option again that you pass to the data editable attribute, but you can go into that more later. Let's change this to meditate, and then let's change this to build a rocket ship. Okay, and I misspelled that, I guess. Okay, and you can also remove these. And if we refresh the page, I just refreshed the page, the data is saved and it's re-rendering here. And that's all just because of this HTML right here. It knows to loop through the to-dos that we're adding. It knows that the to-dos is an array and that the parent data is an object. And that's all because of how we attach these data O key and data O type attributes. It knows how the data is arranged in the database. And that's it. That's a very simple CRUD application. It's a to-do list application in just like 11 lines of actual code or 10 lines of actual code. And it's all HTML, and it's all just these special data attributes that tell Remake how you want your data to be exported, right? Or which data you want to be editable, or where to insert a new item. And this is incredibly flexible. You can make a Trello clone with this. We've already done that. You can make a multi-choice game with this that has infinitely nested choices. We've already done that. You can build a lot of different CRUD applications if you want to build a CRM or you want to build some kind of productivity app. It's very good for that. It's not as good for apps with lots of data like analytics apps or social networking apps, but for simple applications where you just want to give a client or a few clients or 1,000 clients the ability to edit a website and add new information, you can do that. You can build your own web applications very, very, very quickly with Remake once you just learn maybe 6 or 7 different data attributes and their special syntax. You can have a lot of power over how the data is organized and what clicking on what does. If it creates a new item or creates an editable item or saves data or whatever. Now, the things that you probably want to focus on after this video is how to insert that starter data right after you insert a new item. That's very simple. Like I said, that's just in the data folder. The other thing is the routing rules. By default, each page template in the pages directory is going to control how the routing works, but there are some special and pretty cool rules around the routing. I would look into those too. And then there's also saving rules. So by default, Remake's just going to save all of the data on your page, but there are a few special rules that you're going to want to pay attention to if you're creating a multi-page application with a lot of nested data. You're going to want to, have save the data to a specific spot in your data so that you're not overwriting any other data. But yeah, that's also pretty simple because Remake generates unique IDs for you behind the scenes. And that's it. That's all I wanted to show you. I hope you have a nice day, and I hope you have fun exploring Remake. Bye.